People who swore an oath to defend the Constitution of the USA against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. How are you feeling right now? I was born and raised in a country that prided itself on democracy, its ideals of freedom, human rights, and self-governance. I always believed in these principles, and when the time came to serve in the military, I felt it was my duty to protect them. I signed the contract, swore to defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. At that moment, I was full of resolve, ready to give everything for what I believed in. My service began in 1976, on the bicentennial of our country. I found myself in basic training, surrounded by other young men like myself, guys who had come here with one purpose: to be part of something greater than themselves. We were all filled with patriotism, confidence in the righteousness of our mission. For us, it was clear that we were defending not just our land, but the sacred values that form the foundation of our nation: freedom, equality, justice. Years passed, and I served in the military for more than 2 decades, and then continued my service in the Naval Reserve. All that time, I was committed to the idea that our country was a great nation worth defending, because it was built on principles of truth and honor. But here's what I feel today. Today, nearly 50 years since I first swore to defend my country, I no longer feel the same enthusiasm and pride that once filled me. I can't shake the feeling that the country I fought for no longer exists. This America, which once stood as a symbol of freedom and democracy, is gone. It has been overtaken by people who, in my eyes, are corrupt, self-serving, and completely disconnected from the values that made this nation great. I never imagined I would feel this way. In the darkest days of Watergate, when the nation was rocked by scandal and corruption at the highest levels, I never thought that the American government could fall so low, so quickly. Sure, we faced challenges and betrayals, but the principles that defined the country remained intact. There was always a sense that the system worked, that justice would ultimately prevail. But now, I can't ignore what I see happening in Washington, in our political institutions. The corruption, the lies, the betrayal of the very values we swore to protect. It's like a cancer eating away at the heart of the country. The people in power seem more concerned with defending their own interests, propping up a broken and morally bankrupt leader, than with preserving the ideals that America was founded upon. I served in the military because I believed in something greater than myself. I believed in the idea of America, in the notion that we were a country of laws, a beacon of freedom for the world. I still remember standing at attention, hand over heart, taking that oath to defend the Constitution. It wasn't just a formality, it was a sacred promise, and I took it seriously. But what are we defending now? I've watched in disbelief as our government has become more divisive, more corrupt, and less accountable to the people. The very institutions that were meant to protect the freedoms we hold dear seem to be under constant assault. Instead of working for the good of the nation, politicians have become more focused on maintaining power, on protecting their own selfish agendas, on appeasing a base that thrives on division and fear. It feels like we're no longer a democracy, but an oligarchy controlled by a handful of powerful, greedy individuals who care only for their own interests. I never thought I'd see the day when the country I swore to protect would be unrecognizable. But here we are. The ideals that once made America a shining example of freedom and justice now feel like a distant memory, a broken promise. It's hard to reconcile the America I served with the one I see today. It's not just about politics, it's about the soul of the nation. What happened to the country that stood for freedom, equality, and the pursuit of happiness? What happened to the idea that anyone, no matter their background, could come here and find opportunity, dignity, and respect? Those values seem to be slipping away, replaced by fear, division, and greed. It's as if the very essence of America is being eroded from within. As someone who dedicated his life to serving this country, it's painful to watch. I swore to protect the Constitution, but now I'm left wondering what I was really protecting all those years. Was it the ideals of liberty and justice? Or was I, and so many others like me, simply protecting a system that was destined to become corrupted and hollowed out from within? It's not that I've given up on America, far from it. I still believe in the power of the American people to rise above the corruption, to reclaim the principles that this country was founded on. But it feels like an uphill battle. The fight for the soul of this nation is more urgent than ever. As I look at the country today, I am filled with a deep sense of loss, of betrayal. I feel as if I have been watching a slow-motion collapse of everything I once believed in. And I wonder if we will ever be able to restore the values that made America great. Will we ever return to the principles of truth, justice, and equality? Or are we doomed to watch as this country, which I once swore to protect, continues to crumble under the weight of its own corruption and failure? It's hard to say. But what I do know is this: the America I fought for no longer exists. And it's up to the people, the ones who still believe in the ideals this country was founded upon, to fight to bring it back. It's going to take courage, integrity, and a willingness to confront the darkness that now consumes our political system. But if there's any hope for America's future, that's where we have to start. When I first joined the military, I was a young man, eager to serve my country. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that mattered. And at that time, there was no question in my mind that the United States was a beacon of hope and justice in the world. I remember my first day at basic training vividly. The proud, excited feeling of putting on that uniform, of standing with other men and women who shared the same sense of duty and honor. We were all there for one reason: to protect the Constitution, to defend the ideals that this country was built upon: freedom, democracy, equality. I enlisted in the Army in 1976, just as America was celebrating its bicentennial. That year was symbolic for many reasons, not just because of the country's 200th birthday, but because it represented a time of reflection, a time to look back on all that had been accomplished and how far we had come. It was also a time to look forward, to think about how we as a country would continue to evolve. And for me, that meant being part of the generation that would continue to fight for the principles of liberty and justice. My commitment to serving was never just about the job. It was about something deeper, something much more profound. The idea that through service, I could be a part of something bigger than myself. And for years, that belief held strong. I saw my service not as a sacrifice, but as an honor. I believed that by protecting our country, I was doing my part to ensure that the ideals of the Founding Fathers would remain intact for generations to come. But as time went on, I began to notice something troubling. The values that I had sworn to defend, the values that made this country great, were slowly being eroded. It didn't happen overnight, of course. It wasn't as if there was one defining moment that caused everything to unravel. But it was a gradual decline, one that became harder to ignore as the years went by. After I left active duty, I continued my service in the Naval Reserve. By then, I had already put in 2 decades of service, and I believed that my work was far from finished. I still had a duty to the Constitution, still had an obligation to protect this country from threats, both foreign and domestic. And so I kept going, even as the political landscape began to shift in ways that I couldn't fully understand. The first major shock came during the early 2000s, with the events of 9/11. The nation was reeling, and I, like so many others, felt an overwhelming sense of duty to do everything I could to support my country. But something began to change in the years that followed. It was subtle at first, but the cracks were starting to show. There was a growing sense of division in the country. Politicians began to prioritize their own agendas over the needs of the American people. What had once been a government dedicated to the common good started to resemble something far more self-serving. I watched as the media became more polarized, as citizens became more entrenched in their beliefs, unwilling to listen to each other or find common ground. The rhetoric grew more hateful, the divisions deeper. And then, in the most recent years, things began to fall apart entirely. The leader of the country, someone I never thought would rise to such a position, had no regard for the values I held dear. I won't get into the specifics of politics because this story is not about one person. But what I will say is this: I felt like the America I once swore to protect had been hijacked. It wasn't about protecting the Constitution anymore. It wasn't about standing up for the American people. It was about maintaining power, no matter the cost. I watched helplessly as the nation became more and more fractured. Political parties no longer worked together to find solutions. They simply fought to destroy each other. The very principles that had once made America a shining example to the world were being trampled upon. The Constitution, the bedrock of this country, was being ignored, twisted, and abused by those who were supposed to defend it. At times, I felt like I was living in a parallel universe. This wasn't the country I had served. This wasn't the nation that had inspired me to put on the uniform all those years ago. This was something different. A country where corruption ran rampant, where people were more concerned about their own power than the common good, where the truth didn't matter, and where the values of liberty and justice seemed like a distant memory. I can't help but feel a sense of betrayal. I took an oath to defend this country, to protect it from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. But the enemy now is within. The enemy is corruption, greed, and a complete disregard for the values that made this nation great. It's hard to reconcile the America I fought for with the one I see today. I think about the young men and women who are currently serving in the military, and I wonder how they feel. Do they still believe in the same ideals I once did? Are they still fighting for the same country I once swore to protect? Or are they too questioning whether the mission is worth it anymore? It's not that I regret my service. I don't. I'm proud of what I did. But I do regret what has happened to this country. I regret that the very ideals I swore to protect are now being undermined by those in power. I regret that the country I loved has become a place where truth is negotiable, where the pursuit of power is more important than the pursuit of justice. And so, I find myself asking, what is left to protect? If the very fabric of this nation is being torn apart, if the ideals that once made us a shining example of democracy and freedom are being discarded, what is there to defend anymore? I still believe in America, but I no longer recognize the country I once loved. The ideals I fought for seem increasingly out of reach. I can only hope that, somehow, we find our way back to the principles that once made this nation great. But I fear that it may be too late. In the end, it's not about one man, one administration, or one political party. It's about the soul of the nation. And right now, that soul feels lost. The fight to restore the America I once knew is more urgent than ever, but I fear it may be a fight we can't win. I enlisted in the military in 1984, right after high school. I had always been patriotic, always believed in the ideals of freedom, equality, and justice that this country was founded on. My decision to join was driven by a mix of youthful ambition, a desire for structure, and a genuine sense of duty. I didn't really think about it too much. I just knew that serving in the Army would be a way to show my commitment to those values. At the time, I felt invincible. The world seemed full of possibilities, and America was the land of opportunity. Even when I went through basic training and endured the grueling physical and mental challenges, I never doubted the larger purpose behind it all. We were training to defend our country, to protect the Constitution, and to uphold the principles that made America the envy of the world. My first deployment came a few years later, in the late 80s, and I served in the Middle East. It was a time of intense global tension, and I saw firsthand the threat that authoritarian regimes posed to the freedoms we took for granted. I believed in what we were doing. Our mission was clear: to stop oppression, to fight for the values of democracy, and to show the world that America stood against tyranny. As I moved through the ranks, I continued to believe that my service was meaningful. I watched the world change, I watched our country grow, and I believed we were progressing as a society. But as the years went on, and after more deployments, the ideals I had sworn to protect started to feel like distant echoes, fading into the background of an increasingly fragmented political landscape. By the time I retired in 2010, after nearly 26 years of service, something had shifted. I wasn't the same person who had enlisted all those years ago. The military, the one institution I had believed was the ultimate defender of freedom and democracy, was no longer the only symbol of American greatness in my eyes. I started to realize that something had gone terribly wrong in the fabric of our society. At first, I chalked it up to the natural cynicism that comes with age and experience. After all, as you grow older, you start to see more of the world's imperfections. But it wasn't just that. It was more than that. It was the increasing divisiveness in the country, the toxic political climate, the sense of betrayal by our leaders, and the rapid erosion of the very values I had sworn to protect. I watched as political polarization grew. I saw how, over the years, the media became more divided, the rhetoric more extreme, and the truth more difficult to discern. It felt like everything that made this country great, our commitment to equality, justice, and fairness, was slowly being undermined. The focus shifted from serving the people to serving political parties, personal interests, and a very narrow version of American identity. It felt as though the fabric of democracy itself was unraveling. In the years after I left the military, I became involved in local politics, trying to make a difference at the community level. But that, too, felt like fighting an uphill battle. Politicians were no longer concerned with solving problems or improving the country. They were obsessed with staying in power. I saw the system become more and more corrupted. Lobbyists and special interests had more influence than everyday citizens. The needs of the average American were becoming secondary to the whims of the wealthy and powerful. Then came the 2016 election. The political landscape had already been fractured, but that year felt like a breaking point. I was horrified by the rhetoric I was hearing, the way people were treating each other. It wasn't just political disagreement, it was personal animosity, even hatred. People who had once respected each other were now bitter enemies simply because of their political beliefs. It felt like the country I had fought for was no longer a place of unity, but one of division and resentment. But it wasn't just the election, it was the aftermath. The way the new administration seemed to thrive on chaos, division, and disregard for the truth. Watching the events unfold, I couldn't help but feel like the country was being led down a dangerous path. The values that I had once held so dear, the ones I had pledged my life to protect, were now being trampled on by those in power. I saw how lies became normalized, how the Constitution was bent to fit the needs of the powerful, how the media and public discourse were twisted into something almost unrecognizable. I'll admit, at times, I felt like I was losing hope. I began to question everything I had believed in. Was all my service for nothing? Did I spend over 2 decades defending a country that was no longer worthy of that defense? The America I had sworn to protect was no longer the one I saw around me. It was fractured, disillusioned, and struggling to find its way. It was as if the principles that once defined us, freedom, justice, and equality, had been replaced by fear, distrust, and division. The more I watched, the more I saw how deep the rot went. It wasn't just a problem with one party or one leader, it was systemic. It was a cultural and political shift that had been building for years. The erosion of the American ideal was not the result of one moment, but the culmination of decades of neglect, greed, and corruption. People had stopped caring about the common good and started caring only about themselves, their own interests, and their own narrow worldview. But then something unexpected happened. I started to see people, ordinary citizens, rising up. Not politicians, not wealthy elites, but regular people, the ones who had been ignored for so long. They started to speak out, to demand change. They started to reclaim the very values that had once defined America. And I began to see a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't all lost. Maybe there was still a way forward, but it wasn't gonna be easy. I realized that the fight for America's soul wasn't over. It wasn't just about defending the Constitution. It was about defending the ideals of democracy itself. It was about ensuring that the country I had once sworn to protect could still be a place where freedom, justice, and equality weren't just words, but realities. It was about reminding people that we are not defined by the divisions that separate us, but by the common values that unite us. So I began to get involved again, not as a soldier in uniform, but as a citizen who still believed in the promise of America. I started working with local groups, trying to bridge the divides, to bring people together around the common goal of restoring the nation's ideals. It wasn't easy, and at times it felt like an impossible task. But I still believed that this country was worth saving, and I was willing to do whatever I could to help. America may be lost in many ways, but it's not beyond redemption. It's up to us, the people, to restore it. The values I swore to defend, the values that made this country great, are still alive, if only we have the courage to fight for them. And that's exactly what I intend to do.